Thank you everyone for joining for this virtual presentation. We are so lucky to have Shanna presenting to us today. As I think most of you know, Shanna was at PEPtBO last fall, working on some banding with our team, and is now back in her home country and doing some work on not just birds but some other animals, and we're so lucky that she's able to present to us from across the water. So go ahead, Shanna.
Alrighty, thank you. Good evening, everybody. Good to virtually be with you. From the photos and videos, it does seem as if I might be able to survive in PEPtBO right now at this temperature and this climate. So that's looking good. But it's good to be here, and thank you so much, Mira, for the invitation to speak. So I'm very excited to be a part of PEPtBO's Birding Festival this year. My presentation this evening is called The Power of Restoration and How Removing Invasive Mammals Benefit Resident and Migratory Birds in Antigua and Barbuda. I will give a little bit of a disclaimer that, you know, it is a bird presentation. It is mostly birds, but because it's me, there will be some other species popping up. So I hope everybody is ready for that. So first of all, I wanted to tell you a little bit about the organization that I work for, which is the Environmental Awareness Group, or the EAG. And we are Antigua and Barbuda's oldest environmental NGO, and we've been at the forefront of conservation work for over 30 years. Our tagline, it's very simple. It's for the benefit of people and wildlife. And so in all of the work we do, in everything that we do in the public, it goes into our aim to have a society where everyone cares for, values the ecosystems and wildlife of Antigua and Barbuda. We believe that environmental work should not only be worthwhile, but also interesting and satisfying with a hint of adventure. So first of all, just to kind of get our minds into, what about the Caribbean? You know, yes, we have the beaches, yes, we have the rum, yes, we have the birds, but what else about the area makes us so important? So first of all, islands are irreplaceable treasures, right? We're surrounded by water, we're geographically isolated, and we compose 5.3% of the Earth's land area. So very, very tiny. And we are also characterized by high levels of endemism. So because these things are restricted to these islands, it means that, you know, they've evolved to be endemic and found nowhere else on the planet. In Antigua and Barbuda and on islands in general, we are inextricably linked to our environment. And so very much like I wanted to do while I was up in Canada, I can just decide, hey, I want to go to the beach today. And we have 365 to choose from, you know, so being a part of nature, being surrounded by the water, it's all part of who we are as human beings, as part of our livelihoods, part of our economy, our health, our mental well-being, and like I said, our culture as a people. And because we are geographically isolated, unfortunately, that means that we're extremely vulnerable because our sizes and our locations put us on the front line for climate change impacts. So our resilience is already weakened by non-climate stressors such as habitat loss, pollution, overexploitation of natural resources, development, etc. And of course, the 4Ts, trade, travel, transport, and tourism, have stopped. You know, those used to be barriers before that have now increased the amount of things that can happen to the island and increases our vulnerability, including spreading species out of their range. And on the screen, I just want to highlight that this picture is actually from Hurricane Irma in 2017. And that is Antigua and Barbuda right in the middle of the eye of the hurricane. So this was just the other day in 2017. And as you can see, I think that was a category 5+++. It was like the strongest one ever recorded. And unfortunately, Barbuda and a lot of our other Caribbean sisters and brothers got ravaged last year. So now that we've talked a little doom and gloom, let's talk a little bit about the Caribbean island biodiversity hotspots, right? We have the Little Mermaid coming out, everybody pulling out their steel plans and their little Jamaican accents. But yes, the Caribbean islands, we are a biodiversity hotspot filled with a bunch of endemics, like I would have mentioned. And we are one of the most diverse regions on the planet with species that are found nowhere else on Earth. And even though we are such a biodiversity hotspot, it's only a very small percentage of the Earth's land area, but yet still, we've also had 10% of the world's bird extinction since 1500. We've had 38% of the world's mammal extinction since 1500. And we've had over 65% of the world's reptile extinction since 1500. And of note is that 65% of all of these extinctions have been caused by invasive alien species. So let us start with the genesis, where EAG's conservation efforts began all those years ago. So first of all, I wanted to bring up this little map of Antigua. And as you can see, we have a few species on the screen, and we had our own parrot, we had our own curly-tailed lizard, we had owls. I think this one is a burrowing owl. We had all of these species. And then, of course, you know, colonization. And so rats came in the 1800s. So then, because the rats were causing a problem, the plantation owners at the time had a bright idea. Let us bring something to get rid of these rats because they're eating our cane, they're eating our crops, we're not making any money. So they decided to bring in the mongoose, which caused all of the species to disappear, because back in India, where both of these species are native, the mongoose usually controls the populations of rats. However, over here in the Caribbean, on the Western Hemisphere, it's completely different. And of course, rats are nocturnal, so they're coming out at night. Mongooses are diurnal, they're coming out in the day. So they never actually ended up meeting each other. And what instead happened is that they ganged up on all of the native wildlife that was found here. And so because of this predation pressure, because our species never had a chance or never even needed to evolve or adapt defense mechanisms to these species, we lost several species and we no longer have them today. We even had our own boa, for example. However, something to note is that one species that did survive was our critically endangered Antiguan racer, which was once found on Antigua and Barbuda as well, all over the place, but then was restricted to Great Bird Island, where the arrow is pointing. So yes, this is not Photoshop. This is actually what my office usually looks like. And I want to talk a bit now about the offshore islands and how things started on Great Bird. So first of all, I want to talk about our marine reserve, which is highlighted in the red. And so all of those islands that you can see that are highlighted yellow and the area in red, it is designated as the Northeast Marine Management Area, right? And this is our largest protected area in Antigua and Barbuda. It is 10,975 hectares, which basically means it's about the size of Disneyland, Florida, which I looked up because I'm like, the 10,000 hectares, nobody's gonna get that. So it's about the size of Disneyland. And in this area, the offshore islands that are highlighted in yellow are globally designated as important bird and biodiversity areas and as key biodiversity areas because they host species that are found nowhere else in the world or host species that are breeding in very high capacity. A little bit more about the offshore islands. On the left is a picture I took on the same Great Bird Island. We have actually 51 offshore islands ranging from 0.1 to about 184 hectares. So some of them are just kind of rocky keys and some of them are actually pretty big. There's a mix of private and state-owned islands. A lot of times people ask me, Shanna, why are the islands privately owned? And that's because a lot of things in this country can be bought. And so we have to work with the island owners quite a lot. But most of the offshore islands are characterized by a couple of different habitats, including limestone cliffs, dry scrub and cacti. and then of course mangroves, seagrass beds, and coral reefs. Nearly all of the offshore islands have been colonized by invasive alien species, whether it's rats, mongooses, goats, chickens, etc. So I said the non-bird was coming, and it is the Antiguan racer, or the critically endangered endemic Antiguan racer. So this species was actually formerly the world's rarest snake. Like I would have mentioned, when the mongooses and rats teamed up, all of their numbers really dissipated. And it was a member of the government who actually went over to Great Bird Island and saw that there was one or two individuals still over there. Hooray! And so the EAG, along with our partners, we said, okay, let's try and pull together a really rapid census to see how many do we really have left. And through that, we realized there were only 50 individuals left on the planet. Hence, it was formally dubbed the world's rarest snake. In fact, its numbers were so low, it's actually been declared extinct erroneously twice. But yes, in 1995, we were able to find 50 individuals just on that one island. And something about the Antiguan racer is that they are completely harmless. They have no venom, they have no poison. Their only defense mechanism is putting out a stink or a stench, just like a skunk would. That's their defense mechanism. They grow to about 3 to 4 feet in length. A fun fact about them is that they're actually sexually dimorphic, which is not something that is common in racers at least. And so you can tell males versus females based on what color they are. Their favorite food are lizards. So they spend a lot of time eating them, even though we have seen them go once or twice for a bullfinch, but mostly it's lizards. And like I was talking about the sexual dimorphism, you have the female here on the screen. You see she's like a milky coffee kind of color with darker spots. Meanwhile, the male, he is a lot darker, more of like a rust, dark brown color with lighter spots. And like I said, only 50 Antiguan racers remained on the planet in 1995. And most of the racers that we were catching, we could see the impacts of the rats on them. So for example, in this picture, you can see that this racer has a little stump. What the rats would do, and something about racers, their reproductive organs are found in their tail. So basically the rats, of course, they can't get the whole snake, so they would just nibble off what they could. But that meant that they were basically sterilizing the population, because you had a bunch of racers who, yes, they could see each other, but when it's time to get busy, that was not possible. And this really caused a significant population depression because of the inbreeding. And some of the things we even used to see, sometimes we'd see fused scales, sometimes we'd see double tails. Like there were a couple of different things that we saw that were going on that were very characteristic of inbreeding. And the need to increase their genetic diversity. So the EAG and our partners thought, if the invasive mammals were removed, could the species and ecosystem recover? So we tried it out. And the rat eradication began firstly in 1995, like I would have mentioned. And we didn't only do Great Bird Island where the rats were found. We also did the islands that are surrounding Great Bird, because rats can use islands as stepping stones. Like, okay, let me get to this one, then I can get to this one, and they would just be able to get back. So we wanted a nice, clean, fresh slate. And so to get rid of rats, what we do is we cut a grid in the vegetation, depending on the size of the island. But for a small island like Great Bird, it was 10 meters by 10 meters all across the island. Once these trails are cut, we then put down a waxy bait with the active ingredient being brodifacoum, which basically kills the rats by internal bleeding over a couple of days. So they keep consuming because they're realizing, and then by the time they realize it's too late. And we place the bait down every 30 to 40 meters across the island. And we camp out there for 4 to 6 weeks until we are confident that every single rat has had an opportunity to consume the bait. So once the eradications were completed, we then moved into the monitoring phase, where we installed permanent bait stations. As you can see, the bait stations, they're a little bit off of the ground because we have a serious crab problem. And we had 80 stations that are checked every 5 to 6 weeks. We've actually since increased that number to about 120 because there's still a lot of more pressing threats to the offshore islands. And we wanted to strengthen our biosecurity network. And these bait stations are designed to detect and kill invading rats. And we have a cadre of about 35 to 40 volunteers who support our work and help us to be able to visit these islands so frequently. So with the racer, we then checked to see how the numbers were going. So for every racer that we caught, we inject them with a pit tag so it doesn't measure, we can't like see the snakes moving on a screen, but we're basically doing like a very long-term mark recapture study where every snake we get, we can tell whether we've had it before. And if we have had it, we can see what weight it was, if there were any genetic deformities, its head length, its head width, etc. And from that, we were able to see that within 2 years, the 50 population that we had in 1995 had already doubled in 1997. Then another thing I should mention, because we saw that this method was working so well, we continued to eradicate islands. And to this date, we now have 10 offshore islands that we maintain as invasive species free. We have done 16 total. However, like I mentioned, with the private developers, we've had a situation where we'll clear things off. They look really attractive to developers, and then they're sold privately for development. So we just kind of keep the ones that we need at our core conservation concern, and we maintain them. And through that work, we've been able to reintroduce the racers to other islands. So now they're on 4 different offshore islands, and their populations actually number over 1,200 today. Another thing that we saw on the offshore islands, so like I said, the focus was the racer. That was why we were doing this work, to save the species from extinction. However, we realized, wait, other species like not having rats around. And so we started to see increases in the breeding seabirds that were found there. As you can see, especially the sooty terns, a lot of the ground nesting species. Of course, the rats before would just be able to decimate their populations, but they really reacted to the seabird, to the removal of the rats. This was on some other different islands as well. So it wasn't even on Great Bird alone. We're starting to see it on all the other islands. All of the birds kind of like not having rats present as well. We even check the vegetation. So we do something called fixed point photographs, where we stand in one spot and take pictures over time and then review the photos. And as you can see in 1995, here it was very kind of still vegetated, but a lot of sparse areas. And then you can see the same spot in 2011. So now the vegetation is also reacting positively to the removal of the rats. So I think I would have mentioned that the offshore islands are designated IBA, and the seabird colonies now, people were starting to come to see this, right? Because on these offshore islands with not much human intervention, the species would allow you to get pretty close to them. You'd be able to see them in huge numbers. And we're realizing it's starting to become a tourist attraction. So could the increases in the seabirds be due to other factors other than removing rats? That was what we were wondering. And what was happening on the islands that still have rats? So in 2010, the EAG decided to do our first round of surveys. And we were basically doing a comparative analysis to see the difference between islands that had rats, islands that had rats removed, and islands that have never had rats, right? And that's where I'm going to pause on that section. So that was the old time section of what had been done before. So like I said, 2010, 2011, and now I'm going to jump to 2021 when I started working under this program, and what we did for the surveys to compare it to 2011 to 2021. So the aim of our surveys was to determine the associated effects on avian wildlife following the removal of invasive mammalian predators from the offshore islands. So our hypotheses were that rat-free islands support higher diversity and populations of birds. that islands who are closer to the mainland will support higher populations of land birds because, ease of transport, and that the island size is linked to abundance and diversity of birds. So the larger the island, the more habitats, the more birds, the more diversity of birds you're going to see. And on the right is a rat predating a ruby, unfortunately. Oh, and a seabird. I'm naughty. So let's talk a bit about methodology. How do we conduct these surveys? So first of all, for our land birds, we use point counts. On the right is a male lesser Antillean bullfinch. And all of the land birds seen during a 10-minute period were recorded. The timing, to keep it the same throughout all the surveys, we would always do from 6 a.m. to 11:45, and then 2:45 to 6 p.m. or sunset, using either 1 to 4 volunteers. And we do these land bird counts specifically on 11 offshore islands. But we also incidentally recorded them on 7 others. Next up, for seabirds, we definitely do this between May and June to coincide with the peak of the annual nesting season. So right now, for example, it is crazy over there, as all of the birds have come back to lay like clockwork. And we actually do this on 23 of the offshore islands. So it's quite a lot, but the birds are there, so we're there. And we use 4 different types of methodologies. So the first being a flush count, where we use an air horn, boom, and we count all of the birds while they flushed. The second one is island circumnavigation. So for the islands that are pretty tiny, like small enough, too small for us to go and walk on, we just go right around the island and count the birds from the boat. The third one is belt transect. So we use a measuring tape and count how many obvious or apparent nests we see on either side. And then we have total colony counts. So specifically for the roseate tern, laughing gulls, pelicans, and sooty terns, we have colonies of them, and we get a really good count of that specific colony, using the same number of personnel and timing as the other counts. So to be able to do this, again, EAG, we're a nonprofit, we're an NGO, we only have 8 staff. So we heavily depend on our volunteers. And so over 30 volunteers are trained over a 2-day period. And the sessions involve, of course, species identification, getting familiar and comfortable with the methodology, and most importantly, showing them how to collect accurate data. So on the right, you can actually see we do little cutouts of birds and like little fuzz balls as eggs. And one of our volunteers on the right, he is practicing doing a belt transect for the first time. All right, so now we get into the results, and let's start off with the land birds. So specifically with land birds, we realized that the species of the diversity of land birds in 2011, which is in the green, versus 2021, that it actually had, for the most part, either was stable or increasing, which of course is always a good sign. The most important thing to note is that on one island, we did have a decline, a significant decline. That island, unfortunately, has been sold and is slated for development, but we're watching it. But for the most of the other islands, including some that had rats, for example, like Green and Pelican, they still had quite a high amount of diversity with up to 12 species of land bird present. The next thing we looked at now was the average number of individuals per count. And you can see from comparing the 2011 to 2021 as well, that some of the islands, it's kind of a mixed bag in this one. Like some of the islands were increasing heavily, some of the islands were decreasing heavily. And so again, watching that, but still showing that there is some change in the species abundance. The next is the seabirds. And I just have a note here about the fact that the seabird surveys, we do it in breeding pairs. So we get this by dividing the number of individuals by 2. And breeding evidence was only seen on 21 of the 23 islands that we surveyed. And we recorded 12 species nesting on the offshore islands. And on the right, you can see a picture of our volunteers using our nest and egg identification sheet, which we had to procure because there were so many eggs and so many nests and people were getting confused. So in terms of diversity, you can see for the seabirds, it's quite a lot more, quite a lot better looking. So most of the seabirds diversity either remain stable or increased. On Great Bird Island, which is where everything started, it actually increased, and they have the highest number of breeding seabirds with 8. And even on the islands that had a bit of lower diversity, they all still remain the same or increase in comparison to 2011. Specifically on the islands where invasive species have been removed, something that was super exciting for us to see was the fact that York Island, which was eradicated in 2006 and only had one species of seabird breeding, it jumped to 7 species breeding in 2021. And so for us, that was a really good sign because that's 15 years post-eradication, I believe. So it was a really good sign to show us that, yeah, once the rats are gone, the diversity of seabirds is increasing. In fact, for all of them, they did increase except for Green, which is privately owned and got rats on it again. So their numbers went down. And Galley Minor, which just lost one species, which we think was one of the ones that moved to York Island. And that's just another side note that I will bring. Because we have so many offshore islands restored at this point, if there is a pressure such as like too much human traffic, development, etc., the seabirds, they do move. They'll just get up and go and we'll be like, okay, where did they go? But then when we do our surveys, we'll see, oh, they moved down here or further away from whatever that pressure was. All right, and then yes, seabird breeding pairs on the offshore islands by IAS status. So even on the islands that never had rats present versus the islands that do have rats, you're seeing that definitely the seabirds preferred to breed on those islands. And then in terms of the offshore islands where invasive species have been eradicated, Great Bird definitely has the largest number of breeding pairs with almost 1,000. I am dreading starting that count next week. So now I want to provide a little summary of the findings I just mentioned. So first of all, islands where invasive species have been removed have significantly increased numbers of the breeding seabird species. Secondly, land bird diversity, distribution, and abundance is not affected by invasive alien species, but is more dependent on the size of the island and how far away it is from the mainland. So I think that has to do with the fact that, a lot of these species, such as the white crown pigeon, they're up in the trees. And though rats can climb trees, they prefer to be on the ground. And so the species that are ground nesting are a lot more highly affected. The next thing, yes, seabirds can breed on rat-infested islands, but in largely reduced numbers due to predation of eggs and juveniles. So this picture is from Green Island, which I mentioned had the rats on it, and we came across quite a couple of these dead juvenile red-billed tropic birds. Some of the lessons learned overall include the fact that, black rats deplete biodiversity. Rats can be controlled even in heavily visited areas. The offshore islands get about 90,000 visitors a year. And so even there on Great Bird Island, we've been able to keep it rat-free. The next thing is that the recovery of native species can be very rapid. We had not at all anticipated that the racer would have rebounded so quickly, but it really shows that with just a little bit of help, nature can bounce back. And that monitoring of flora and fauna should ideally begin before rats are eradicated. So you have a little baseline that you can compare things to. All right, and then last but not least is that removing rats has a powerful effect on people too. And the project, it has motivated many people from many different backgrounds to become conservationists. And even to this day, we continue to include a bunch of different volunteers from different ages. Our oldest volunteer, I think, is in their 70s. Our youngest, he's a teenager. We have people of all different shapes, all different sizes, all different genders, all of us united for conservation. So the next question that we had was whether we could replicate our efforts again. We did it once, we did it twice, we did it 15 times, but could we do it again, but on an even larger scale? So here comes Redonda, and here be dragons. Again, we're going to get into some species that are not birds, but I hope y'all are still along with the ride for me. And so let's talk a bit about the mysterious island of Redonda and its wildlife. So I mentioned Antigua, I mentioned Barbuda, but I kept a little secret from you all that there's actually a third island as well. It's actually Antigua, Barbuda, and Redonda. And as you can see on the map, Redonda is actually closer to Montserrat. I'm not sure if y'all have heard of these countries before, but it's a lot closer to Montserrat, which is under the British monarchy, and St. Kitts and Nevis. So somehow the Queen had decided that Antigua is the one that should have Redonda, and we gladly took it. But as you can see from how far away it is, it's actually super far away. I think it's 35 miles southwest of Antigua, while it's only like 11 miles from Montserrat. But just for context, that is where Redonda is located. And so this is how Christopher Columbus saw Redonda in 1493. Because of course, while he's sailing, you couldn't take a photo then. So he had a painter, an artist with him to capture these islands. So when he first saw Redonda, Redonda was looking lushly vegetated, bursting with life, birds everywhere, right? This is 1493. When we saw Redonda in 2008, this was what it was looking like: deforested, eroded, and collapsing into the sea. You could literally count how many trees are on the island, right? And so Redonda as well is globally recognized as an important bird and biodiversity area and key biodiversity area. And that is because even though it was such a dearth environment, such a very dry habitat, it was still super important for wildlife. And so on Redonda, we actually have over 20% of brown boobies in the Eastern Caribbean, which is actually equivalent to 1% of the brown booby population of the planet. So 1% of all brown boobies live on Redonda, which is super cool. The next thing is that we have over 50% of mass boobies in the Eastern Caribbean, which are very, very cute. However, these numbers are no longer the numberless seabirds that were reported in the 1800s. At that point, they used to say that Redonda had so many birds you could not step without crushing one, which is a very hard visual to think, but it helps us to realize how many birds were on this island. But in addition to the birds, there's also a variety of endemic and critically endangered species found nowhere else on the planet. And I need to plug in my laptop. Give me 1 second. 1 second. All right, back like I never left. So, yes, so there's a bunch of critically endangered endemic lizards found nowhere else on the planet except for on Redonda, including the Redonda tree lizard, which is pictured. This is the male. And I want you to think in your head how a tree lizard was surviving on Redonda when there weren't no trees, right? The next species we have is the critically endangered Redonda ground dragon. As you can see, they're black, they're glossy. They're also very friendly, or I should say curious. I've had about 12 of them on me at one point. So they're very curious.
And well, I can't take them off because I need to listen to this.
Oh, sorry. Then we have the critically endangered Redonda pygmy gecko, which is actually the third species, and it is extremely new to science. In fact, it's so new to science, it doesn't have a scientific name yet. So that's pretty exciting. And in addition to the lizards, we also have some super rare and unusual lichens and plants, including the jumping cactus. And in case you're wondering what a jumping cactus does, that's what it does. It jumps. So when we pass by, we trigger its dispersal mechanism. And so you'll just be walking on Redonda and then it's like, oh, there's cactus in me. And in addition to all of the great stuff happening on land, the sea is not to be forgotten. And there's also a great number of foraging sea turtles and interesting marine invertebrates such as the bristled fireworm. So where is the forest? Where's the songbirds? Where's the iguanas? So we used to have our own Redonda iguana. We used to have agaves. We used to have burrowing owls. Where were all the species that used to live here? Here comes the recipe for disaster and what were the causes of Redonda's ecological crisis. So from 1865 to 1914, like I said, there were numberless seabirds over on Redonda. And if there's all of those seabirds, of course, humans, we have to interject and do something to exploit our habitat. So a guano mine was actually set up, an American company set up a guano mine on Redonda from 1865 to 1914, employing over 100 workers, most of them from Montserrat and a few Antiguans as well. And the miners left behind a huge population of black rats. I'm not sure if you've ever seen a black rat or any kind of rat climb a cactus to eat its flowers, but that's the kind of thing that we would see on Redonda. And as you can see, this is high daytime. This is not at night. They were out at all times of day. And these rats were a highly carnivorous race that could hunt the reptiles. So that is a rat with a Redonda ground dragon, and kill the birds. I actually had the unfortunate experience of being there and seeing how the rats would work. Rats are extremely intelligent. And as you can even see from this picture, as we know, babies, the soft part of their skull is at the back of their head. See the same place that the rats go for. Even when they would go for eggs, I've actually seen the rats tag team to get a egg from underneath a mass booby. One would go in front of the mother and distract her, while the other one would roll the egg away before rolling it into a rock, and then they feast on the yolk because they don't want the white. Again, they're very picky. They have all of these bird eggs to eat. They don't want no white. They only want the yolk. So seeing the rats and how terrible and how carnivorous they were, it was very clear how come Redonda ended up the way that it was. In addition to the rats, as if the rats were not enough, people also left behind feral Spanish goats on the island. And what we think happened here is that, a lot of times when people were sailing still, they would do something where they would leave livestock or leave some sort of meat kind on the island, so that, God forbid, they entered into a shipwreck or something, there would already be food technically there that they could eat. They would just need to hunt it. So this is actually how quite a lot of the Caribbean islands, how we got pigs for the first time, goats, sheep, etc. So we believe that that is how these Spanish goats got over on the island. And we actually did do genetic testing on them. They are related to their origins are in Spain, and some are also found in Cuba. And in 2012, we recorded about 62 individuals. And with this male, I want you to see how his horns are, and then also look at his rib cage. As you can see, these goats were hungry. They were starving to death, in fact, because Redonda, well, y'all saw the picture of Redonda, because Redonda was so desolate and there was not enough food, the goats were literally dying and starving to death on the island. And so one of the things that we even notice, of course, is the fact that there's no standing water, there's no ponds or anything on Redonda. So even for how we think they normally got their moisture or their liquid, was that in the mornings, they would try to crop things and eat them while there's dew there. When it rained, because Redonda has a lot of rocks and caves and stuff, we think that they probably drank what was in the rocks. So it's still kind of a mystery how they were able to survive for so long with so little food. But we realized that their bodies were just littering the island. And so EAG, along with our partners, we thought, if we could remove all the rats and the goats, could this damaged ecosystem and its wildlife possibly recover? So it came in with joined up thinking. So we first formed the plans and partnerships necessary to save Redonda. So as I would have mentioned, EAG, we were already a veteran in island restoration. We have done it since 1995. Like we pretty much knew what to do and how to do it. However, we realized because Redonda is such a desolate place, we needed some help. So we had meetings with the government and other stakeholders to present findings and discuss solutions. This is still more meetings. Yes, a lot of meetings. And based on our conversations with the government, of course, it's rats. Everybody can agree. Rats had to go. But what about the goats? So the goats were evidently suffering on Redonda, like I would have mentioned, and we thought that it would be inhumane to just leave them over there, of course. And so we reached a consensus to bring them into captivity. I should also mention that in Antigua, we're goat people. And so one of our traditional dishes is goat water, which is basically like a stew made of goat meat. I personally don't eat that anymore, and you'll soon see why. But that's just to provide some context into why the government said, yeah, y'all can do whatever with the rats, but the goats have to come here, okay? So in 2016, the Redonda Restoration Program was formed, and a steering committee was put in place. This was May 2016. And then I actually started in August 2016 to do the Redonda restoration. And so now let's get into the rat pack and how we eradicated Redonda's ravenous rats. So I've mentioned already that we have this track record of removing rats, okay? This is the bait that we use. So for context, the blocks are pretty small, and a rat only needs to eat about a quarter of the block for it to be lethal, okay? Even though we had used this bait, like I said, on the offshore islands before, even though we are veterans in this, Redonda posed a lot of novel difficulties. It has high cliffs, it's extremely unstable, it's very remote. And so we assembled a team of skilled staff and volunteers from Antigua, St. Vincent, New Zealand, UK, and Ireland. Where was Canada? But yeah, we assembled this team of volunteers to help us to rid Redonda of the rats. And so 6 of the team members were actually expert climbers, and they would abseil every morning to target the rats that lived on the cliffs. So using all of this camping equipment, hiking equipment, and broadcasting bait all over the cliffs. And so we, as the rat team, lived on Redonda for 2 months. Right there. Yes, we did. No Wi-Fi, no water, no electricity, just vibes. And so we lived over on Redonda for 2 months. And I should mention that we got there via helicopter. Yes. So this is what our little base looks like. So we made it a little home. You know, it's not a house, but it's a home. And these are our tents where we would live right next to the manager's house. So that's actually a remnant of the mine manager who would have been there all of those years ago. It has survived. And for context, what we would do, so like I mentioned, the cliff team, they would go on the cliffs. But us on the ground team, all of those little dots, we would visit every morning, right? And as I would have mentioned when I was talking about the offshore islands, we place the rat bait every 30 to 40 meters, which is basically the home range for a rat. So if you think like a rat right now, within 30 meters will be your school, your church, PEPtBO, the supermarket, everything is within that space, right? And so to make sure every rat had a chance to encounter, we put down all of these bait station points, and we would check and replenish bait as necessary every single day for 2 months. And the rats very eagerly took the bait. We did do this during the dry season. It was like March, April. So the rats were super, super hungry. The estimate that we had of the rats when we did our feasibility study was that there was about 6,000 rats over on Redonda. And just for context, Redonda is only a mile long. Yeah. So that's just to tell you what kind of density we had. And even on my first night on Redonda, I did not sleep because there were rats just climbing over my tent all night. However, because these rats were so hungry, so ravenous, their population actually collapsed within 2 weeks. And we have not detected any rat signs since March 2017, thank God. And so now let's get into the goat section and how we relocated feral goats from Redonda to Antigua. So we built a self-mustering corral in the goat's favorite part of the island. And the gates, if you can see the gates in the picture, they're kind of like this, and they're supposed to be able to come in and not be able to get out. And so we made it like a hotel. We had shade in there, we had water, we had some food. Like we thought we were putting on like a little hotel, a little Airbnb. And we also hired a goat relocation team leader to use snares, for example, and to hand catch some of the goats. However, we realized that these goats were a lot smarter than we are, as feral wildlife are. And so they would see our snares and jump over them. They never came to the corral. They always ignored us. And finally, the only way we were able to get any success in capturing the goats was actually cornering them and catching them hand by hand. And how we do this was that we started thinking as humans, right? So the first thing we did was capture the kids. Sorry, babies. So we captured the kids first. All right, put them in the pen. Of course, if the kids are there, the mothers are gonna come. So then the females started coming closer and then we grabbed them. And of course, if there's women and children there, the men are going to follow. And that is how we were actually able to capture the goats. And so once we caught the goats, we named all of them, which is why I can't eat goat meat anymore. And we actually carried them over in the helicopter. Some people think we do it like Fast and Furious style, like having them hanging underneath, but no, they were right there in the cockpit with us. We held each and every single one and brought them over to Antigua. And there's salt. We had a twin. It was salt and pepper. So that's salt in my hand there. And so the goats were housed in a new facility under the care of our veterinary and livestock division and with a private vet as well. So in terms of home improvement, are there any signs of habitat recovery after we've removed these rats and goats? I wonder what y'all think, but let's watch the video first. So this is 2016. So this is when I was just about to begin my job straight out of university. And this is the blank canvas that we had. So if you look at Redonda, you're seeing the cliffs. Yeah, as you can see, there's a bit of vegetation, but not really anything. Just looking dry and barren, really. So that was 2016. And 1 year later, literally without us planting anything, without us doing any kind of regeneration work, all we did was get rid of the rats and the goats. And within 1 year, this is what Redonda was looking like, okay? This is the power of restoration, people. So in terms of home improvement, we continue to monitor the changes to the plants, the lichen, invertebrates, reptiles, birds, and bats. We actually visit every single year where we stay over for a week or two and count everything basically. And in terms of land birds, from 2012 to 2016, there was only really a peregrine and a zenata dove. But once we got rid of the rats, there was natural recolonization of land birds underway. So we, of course, still have the peregrine falcon. We have the zenata dove, banana quits, elenias. We've seen a yellow warbler over there. I even saw a green-throated carib, which was very crazy. And I'm like, buddy, you're a hummingbird. You're here too early. There's no flowers. But it was really reassuring for us because it was showing us that, hey, the birds can come here. And they can choose to stay now that, it's like, oh, the habitat is improving. Maybe I'll stay here for a long while. So yes, within only a few months of removing rats and goats, we recognize an increase in plant biomass. So I should say we went from having 17 species recorded in 2012 to over 88 in 2021. We've seen more species of land birds, like I mentioned. We've seen an increase in butterflies and other invertebrates. There's a fall in predation on invertebrates, bird eggs, chicks, and lizards. the first bat was sighted. And yeah, it's just been very great seeing how Redonda has recovered. In terms of seabirds, because I'm sure I'll get that question, the numbers have been kind of constant, stable and slightly increasing. The thing is, of course, because these are boobies, some of them are nesting all year round, and some of them, like this year, it's going to be the first year that we get like the adults who would have survived from 2016 that are coming back to breed and stuff. So the seabird numbers, it's not as drastic as the offshore islands as yet. However, in terms of their distribution, and even in terms of contracting their breeding time, we think that before they were breeding all year round because, you know, rats kept eating their babies. But if there's no longer any rats, I can kind of, you know, have certain periods where I'm breeding. So the secret of success, how did we get this to happen? First of all, is that we recognized there was a need for a multi-stakeholder collaboration for the Redonda Restoration Program. We needed all hands on deck. The second thing is that they benefited from EAG's experience of over 20 years of island restoration and invasive alien species control. The third thing is that skilled personnel and diverse international partners each bring complementary expertise that can allow us to achieve the things we want to. The fourth thing is that we have donors and other supporters who understand the power of restoration. And so even here, you can see this is more updated fixed point photographs. So we have one spot in 2012, and you can see the difference in 2020. Again, we have not done any vegetation. We have not done any planting or anything. This is just all natural stuff that has come up. We've even seen some interesting things come up, such as tobacco. I assume while the miners were over on Redonda, they wanted a little smoke here and there. So that was kind of cool to see come up. And so they understand that invasive species removal, all of that, it can have a lot of power. And yeah, restoring habitats and tackling harmful aliens, it is crucial, especially in a time right now where our species and habitats are facing so many other threats. The least we can do is try and tackle that man-made issue. And our findings have shown it can show surprisingly speedy results. So for my last slide, I just wanted to end off on what are the future directions? What are the next steps? First of all, continuing bird monitoring efforts on the offshore islands. So like I would have mentioned, it's kind of peak breeding season right now. So literally from this week, we will be out, well, since last week, really, we've been out counting the birds on the 23 offshore islands. This year as well, it's a regional seabird census in the Caribbean. So everywhere in the region is counting seabirds. And so we're very excited to be a part of that and to provide an updated number on what we have. Next is the use of the Pro-Wallis protocol to standardize land bird counts. So Birds Caribbean, which is the regional NGO, which I think y'all might know. They're the ones who sent me to PEPtBO. They have just introduced this standard way of counting land birds that, again, everybody in the region is using. We're very big on making sure that the data that we're collecting, it's relevant and that it's comparable across the board. The next exciting thing is inclusion of Barbuda surveys. I know I didn't mention this, but we actually have an endemic bird. I know we don't do a lot with it, which is why I didn't really mention it in the presentation. But there's a new NGO in Barbuda and there's some exciting things going on. And so we've actually been able to set up some of these surveys and we're working with that NGO to help them to designate a site as an important area for the Barbuda warbler. So that's very exciting. I'm so happy to be able to include Barbuda. Outreach and education, very, very big part of what we do. In the below picture, you can actually see me dressed up as the same Barbuda warbler that I was talking about. So for the Caribbean Endemic Bird Festival, for World Migratory Bird Day, and in general, especially with me, I'm always talking about birds, they're important, and especially with the focus on primary school children, secondary school, and tertiary level, of course. The next big one, of course, is misnetting and color banding of birds. So with where I work, I was always very hesitant of how exactly will I be able to get this done. EAG, we've actually just moved into a new office last month that is right in between the offshore islands bird area and another bird area that we work in. And so in my eyes, I think it's the perfect place to start a little banding program. And so once I get all of my field surveys done by August, I want to start looking into starting up some banding. So hopefully y'all see me again, or somebody has to come down and help me to set that up. And then last but not least, of course, once I am certified and stuff, and once things are going along, we want to be able to join the Caribbean Bird Banding Network. And so Birds Caribbean is kind of championing this, again, making sure everybody in the region is doing the same things. I will, of course, still hopefully be using the bands that we use at PEPtBO, specifically for the migratory birds, but for the resident birds, looking into being able to get the bands from Birds Caribbean and start this Caribbean Bird Banding Network. I will end by saying that these things are funding dependent. And like I mentioned, we're an NGO, so I will have to look for some money to be able to continue these things. But yes, with that, I hope that you all have enjoyed this. I thank you for allowing my technical difficulties not to stop us. And let me know if you have any questions. Or is everybody stunned silent?
That was so fun.
We really enjoyed that presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So you've gone back to each of these islands, and how does it feel having seen them in, such a what's the word, like run down state, and now to see them improve? That must be really rewarding.
It is. And I always tell people that's like the best part of my job, is that I have a job where we do something and I see the impact. You're not just on your computer all day. Like, in fact, if I'm not in the field, my boss would be like, okay, Shanna, you need to go, because they can tell when I've not been outdoors and not seen something. So it's been incredibly rewarding, especially with Redonda. Tears have been shed for sure when we've seen some of the things. I would say with the offshore islands, it feels very much like a double-edged sword, because the more attractive we make the offshore islands look, because even as you pass by on a boat, you can see the ones that are bursting with life and then the ones that are dead. And so you can tell which ones have rats and which ones don't. And then it's like, oh yes, that's great. Let me put a hotel on there. No. So that has been, especially post-COVID, I know I kept kind of bringing that in here and there, but especially post-COVID, the island owners have been a bit less, I don't want to say they've been less sympathetic, but they've been more economically minded. So yes, conservation, it is good, but it's not putting money in my pocket. So for EAG right now, another thing we're going to be working on is setting up like a sustainable financing unit, so that we're able to start generating some money, and able to show the decision makers and stuff, even the island owners, like, yes, conservation, it can have economic and ecological benefit.
Good. This is Hi, I want to say how much we've enjoyed your presentation. There are 6 of us watching it in the living room here in Picton after enjoying the Bird Festival this weekend. I'm so impressed with this island and its recovery, and that it goes so fast, like within a year. I guess it's all related to your climate that is maybe not as harsh, that allows this fast regeneration. I mean, what are your thoughts about why go so quick after removing just, the 2 predators, or whatever you want to call them, predators?
That's a very good question. And hello to the watch party in the room. So I think it's a couple of different things, right? So I think, first of all, because Redonda was like rock bottom, no pun intended, I feel like when I got it, I was like, well, it can't get any worse than this. Right? Yeah. So I think one thing is that it was so bad that with any pressure gone, the things would have been like, yes, let's go, let's grow. I think also, so that year is when Hurricane Irma passed through as well. And so Antigua, we didn't get it that bad. It mostly went into Barbuda, but that would have brought a lot of rain, of course. So we think that because of the rain that happened, that heavy rain that happened with the hurricane, and because things were so bad, that's why we think it really, blossomed. And something I should also mention is the fact that goats, and I always tell people sheep are better than goats, because sheep will just kind of crop off the top. They'll just take a little munch, cut down the hair. But goats, they're removing from the roots. So any little sapling, any little thing like that tried to grow was immediately decimated by the goats. And then the rats, well, they were eating everything, but they would also eat the seeds as well. So it's like anything that wanted a chance to grow never had the opportunity. And so we really think that all of these things were just sitting in the seed bank, kind of just waiting for a moment. And I think it really was kind of like divine timing, like us coming in, the hurricane, well, not really the hurricane coming, but the heavy rainfall and where the island was. I think that's why we saw the recovery come up so quickly. And something that I should mention as well is that although the recovery has been great, we unfortunately have seen some invasives spring up as well. Because again, they were also just waiting for their opportunity, and they're able to kind of outcompete our native species. And so one of the species that we're actually having a problem with right now, it's guinea grass. It's also called green panic. But it's a grass that is extremely flammable. So if you have an extremely flammable grass on an island that is so dry and stuff, you can imagine our concerns. And so we've been doing a couple of, and I will say the good thing about Redonda is that things don't go according to plan most of the times. And so it's always challenging us to kind of adapt. So the first thing we did was from a botanist, he said, okay, just collect it in bags and then put it on top of the rocks. The sun will dry it out, problem solved. We're like, okay, great, no problem. If the grass is on the rock, and y'all see how Redonda is, you can imagine there's quite some heavy winds blowing through. The seeds started to disperse even further. So we're like, hello, this is not working. And so we're like, okay, we have to do this properly. Like any little DIY kind of thing is not going to work. And so we actually applied for a grant to specifically remove the invasive guinea grass. And we're now doing this process called soil solarization, which I love to say because it sounds nice. But it's basically just getting huge pieces of tarp, preferably gray or black, and just putting them down and smothering basically and cooking the guinea grass. And so once it's dead, it's dead. Of course, we're like, okay, great, this is going well. And there's no more black tarp in Antigua for whatever reason. So now we have to, like I say, it's always something. And in conservation in general, it's always some other hurdle. But I think because we're conservationists, we kind of anticipate these hurdles and we take it in our stride. And so right now we're trying to source some black tarps to continue the soil solarization. The closest we have right now is gray, but it's just not doing it as quickly. So yeah, that's how come I think that the recovery was so quick. And a lot of our vegetation, I mean, it's also, and I think like you said, it is because we don't have, a fall where everything goes bare. We don't have, we do have kind of a spring, kind of, where things are all blooming and all the birds are nesting. But it's very much in Antigua, we just have wet season and dry season. Those are the two major seasons that we have. So yes, I hope that answered your question. I realize I went on a little bit.
It sure did. It sure did. One other thing, you mentioned the island is sinking into the ocean. Yeah, you said it was collapsing.
Collapsing. Okay, so I didn't mean the island itself, but like the cliffs. So the sides of the island were sinking. And
Oh,
so
okay.
that is a whole other thing that we think was also because of the impacts of the goats. Of course, if there's not many trees, that means there's not a lot of roots to stabilize the soil. And so every day there would just be piles and piles of dust and rocks going into the sea. And when we actually did the marine surveys now and started diving, we're realizing, well, first of all, down here does not look at all like what Antigua does underwater, because of course we're limestone, we're coral reefs, we're completely different. But Redonda, it's actually volcanic. So underwater it's like dark and mysterious, and there's all these rocks and all of these things. And we were like, okay, how has this been impacting? And so that's another aspect of the work that we're doing. Every 5 years we visit, well, it's actually every 3 years, but we're changing to 5 years. But we also are documenting the marine space around the island as well, to kind of see how has it changed since all when it was 2016, when all of this stuff was going in all day, every day, excess this, excess that, turbidity, sedimentation. How is that changing to now when there technically should be less, because you have more trees coming in, you have more roots to stabilize the soil, and you don't have that continuous kind of erosion type of pressure. So it was more the cliffs. And I just forgot a very, very important thing, a very happy thing I was supposed to end this off with, that the EAG is actually going to be the managers, because we're designating Redonda and its surrounding seas as a protected area. And it's actually going to be the first protected area ever managed through public-private partnership, because our government basically has thankfully admitted that they can't do it correctly. So they want us to do it anyway.
Okay.
Don't worry,
That's
y'all. I
great.
would have said it if they were on the call as well. But yeah, that is very exciting that we're going to be able to keep Redonda as it is, because unfortunately, I had been in conversations with cabinet before, and the prime minister had flat out asked me, oh, could we do like glamping over there? So that's like glamorous camping, like putting in all these kind of things. I'm like, did you see Redonda? They ain't nothing glamorous about camping over there. I hadn't even mentioned the bathroom situation to him, so I don't know how he would have thought that was a good idea. And so, like I said, us in the Caribbean right now, especially in Antigua and Barbuda, the appetite for environmental activities, it's there, but it's not there in practice. It's there when they're signing all these agreements. So we're signed on to a bunch of things, but when it comes down to it, we get a common thing that we hear is like, oh, that's a protected area. Oh, that's wasted land, right? They're not seeing the long-term value. They're not seeing any returns on protected areas at this point. Actually, all of our protected areas are marine. None of them are terrestrial. None of those have worked yet. So we'll actually be the first. And we're happy to be the first to kind of show that we can do things correctly and do it right. And so the hope is, once we've shown them like, hey, we're managing Redonda, everything is cool, you're understanding what's going on, give us a little peek, give us some of the offshore islands next. That's our hope. That's our prayer. Because, for example, last year, like I would have mentioned, the racers are on 4 different islands. The island that has the biggest population, over 800 of them, the island owners decided to put on a hotel. Sorry, not a hotel, a restaurant, so that their guests don't have to go out to anywhere else. They can just go on to the island with the restaurant. And they directly put the restaurant in the area where we find the most snakes. And so, like I said, it's like a very challenging uphill battle for us here, which is why, Mira, seeing the impacts of the things that we do, it kind of lifts us back up, because it's like, okay, everything else has gone to crap, but at least my birds are still here. At least this is still there, and I can still, think about those things. But yeah, it's a bit of an uphill battle, but we are, I want to say, cautiously optimistic that once Redonda is declared a protected area, because of course that got delayed because we had an election, all kind of things. But we're hoping and praying it should be by the end of this month. And last but not least, we do have a documentary about all the things that I just spoke about. Y'all are like, what? Yes, we have a documentary. Yes, on top of everything else, right? Because a big thing we realized, like I said, Redon, it's a helicopter away. So it's 20 minutes for us to go. And just for reference, it is 3,000 US every time we go. Okay, that's the discounted rate. Okay, so like I said, we spent a lot of time writing projects and writing to donors so we can get the money to do the things that we do. But with the documentary, we realized a lot of people are not going to get to go to Redonda, so let's bring Redonda to people. And right now, unfortunately, I can't send you the link yet. It's not on YouTube yet because we're actually entering it into film festivals and things like that. So it has to still kind of be offline.
Very cool.
Thank you to the group. But yeah, once the Redonda documentary is live, I can actually send the trailer to Mira that she can share with y'all. But once the documentary itself is live on YouTube, I'll definitely let y'all know so that you can see a part of it. It's not just me. It's quite a lot of many other people that are involved in it. But we're very proud of what we've been able to do with our conservation efforts. We're proud that as well it's Antiguan led. When the pandemic happened, one of the things that we kept hearing with other people was that, oh snap, our researchers can't come because of the pandemic, or researchers aren't able to get this. But because all of us do this work all the time, we were able to continue it. So yes, any other questions? I know. Did I prefix this presentation with the fact that I like to talk? I hope Mira told them, that I'm a talker.
I think we're all definitely digesting, and we're going to be thinking about this for at least, well, definitely. I might have some of those pictures in my dreams.
Yes.
They were very impactful.
Yes, thank you so much. And I'm just really excited, especially for the next level, because like a lot of the stuff, like I said, it's just kind of how many nests are there, how many of that. And with banding, as you all know, there's so much more that you can get once the bird is in your hand. And so that's the next step that we're going to. Phil is nodding his head because he knows he's taking a trip to Antigua soon. And I'm really excited to take things just to the next level. So yeah, I think with that, if there's not any other questions, I'd like to thank Mira, thank PEPtBO, thank the watch party, thank all of the people who are watching for listening to my presentation, for being so attentive. I know it was a lot. Oh, hi, other people. Oh, there's multiple watch. Oh my gosh, and it's just me.
You got a watch party here too.
Yeah. This. Oh, wow. I feel like the Super Bowl or something. But no, this has been really, really good. Like I said, I wish I was at PEPtBO to participate myself in the festival, especially since the weather is looking nice. Or is it all a facade? But especially because the weather has been looking so nice.
It's 13 degrees, Shanna. You wouldn't like it.
Cold winds too.
Oh no. Once it hits, let me know when it hits 20, Phil. Once 20 hit, I can come back. Just for reference, over here, it's 31. Yeah. Yeah.
We'll come visit you.
Yes, and so if anybody on the call is ever in Antigua and Barbuda and wants to get some birding in, please feel free to participate. Well, to call me, to contact me. Mira will share my info. And yeah, I don't want to have anybody on the call later than the time which I just looked at and saw. So I don't know if it's Mother's Day in Canada. Is it?
Yeah.
It is. And y'all are taking the time out to watch me. Okay, thank you as well to the mothers who are tuned in for taking the time out to listen on your special day. And I'm going to stop talking now because I could definitely talk for another hour. But yes, thanks again, PEPtBO, all of the team there. I miss you all quite a lot. Thank you for everybody for listening. I hope you learned a lot. And I will send the trailer to Mira to circulate so that y'all can get your Redonda fill. Okay? No pun, Phil.
Yeah.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Shanna.
Thank you
We
so
really
much, Shanna.
appreciate it, and we're
Wonderful.
so excited to pass on your information in the trailer.
Yay, thank you so much again. All righty, everybody. So take care. I think, yeah, let me stop sharing.